All right. Well, happy Halloween, everyone, and welcome back to another Learning Tech Talks, where we are helping you stay future focused while living at the intersection of business, technology, and the human experience. I've got, I think, three-time guest Josh Kamrath back from Bongo, and I was so excited backstage about the conversation we were having that I said, you know what, just forget this. So I'm going to hit the go live button. But before we get started, for those of you who maybe only catch the beginning of this or miss parts of it, be sure you sign up for my Substack, where I will actually deconstruct this whole conversation and highlight some of the biggest takeaways and actions that you can take. So if you aren't signed up for that, be sure to do that now. But Josh, thank you so much. And we're going to be talking about, you may have seen my post yesterday, the difference between building knowledge and building skill, which is the conversation we always have. But what I'm really looking forward to is talking about the impact generative AI is having at making this infinitely better than what we've been able to do before. So thanks for joining to have that conversation.
Yeah, no, thank you a ton for having me. And yeah, like you said, happy Halloween. So I'm dressed here in the Bongo office as a cow because that's what my wife laid out for me.
I love it. So I do have to ask, is it a full-blown cow setup? Like,
oh yeah,
or is it just a shirt?
I've got the udders and yeah, the whole.
Oh, it's the full thing. Okay, okay.
My family's going for the farm theme this year.
Oh,
so.
You've got a family farm theme going.
Oh yeah,
okay.
Oh yeah,
right.
for sure.
Right.
Yeah, last year it was the Wizard of Oz. So this year we're doing farm animals. Or
okay. So that's a thing for you and your family. You do a theme around the year.
Yeah, exactly. Yep. Like so we all go out and trick or treat. Both, my wife, and we have two little boys, and but then I have two sisters too that live in northern Colorado, and so we all go out with.
Oh, so it's a family.
With all the cousins.
So is everyone in the family in on this farm theme?
Oh yeah,
not just your
exactly. We're all, it's a big effort to get,
I would imagine
or whatnot to coordinate. Okay. So going
all
in.
I fully expect to see pictures on social media of Kamrath farm crew. All of that, especially growing up in the Midwest. I may critique whether your, choices are accurate to real farm living based on growing up in the sticks of Minnesota. But that's awesome. Sure. I love it. I love it. So for those who may not be familiar with who you are, let's do a little bit of backstory because people may not know Josh and who Bongo is. So let's make sure we level the playing field on that one. And then let's dig into this whole generative AI and skill building conversation.
Sure. Yeah. So I guess, introduction of myself. So I'm Josh Kamrath, CEO of Bongo. What Bongo is we're a video-based skill validation tool where we have learners demonstrate their skills or competencies. And those could be sales skills. They could be demonstrating business processes. It could be vocational, like how to drive a forklift. So the learners are demonstrating their skills through video. And then we have
how to drive a forklift. I'm actually really curious how you validate your forklift skills. I mean, I get how you could do it in prep, but I'm picturing how that plays out.
Yeah, well, typically they, do it with a mobile device. So they'll, have a colleague or peer record through a.
Okay, I was going to say they better have a colleague or peer recorded to do it versus the whole selfie stick. Otherwise, that would just not be
safe. There's certainly use cases that require a buddy. That's for sure one of them. But we have similar. It's for vocational training. They'll record themselves and kind of walk through the different safety elements or different, levers and features of a forklift. And then historically, the last decade, we've had their colleagues, peers, or managers provide critique and feedback. So things like timestamped comments. Now, as you alluded to, we have quite a bit of additional AI centric capability that will automate the critique process. So similar to a human evaluator, it'll auto grade them. We call it smart scoring on both the delivery and the content of are they getting the actual concepts correct? Are they articulating where the buttons are and where the shut off, string is?
Yeah, the emergency shut off for when they,
Exactly.
knock over the shelf.
Yeah, so it's but it is a very wide range of use cases, right? So from vocational training, like forklift safety or how to put a fire suit on for firefighters, to how to be a better leader, how to give constructive criticism. Another cool use case is actually a restaurant that's a chicken-based restaurant that has a cow as their mascot. All of the managers in North America, similar use case where they have a colleague record with a phone, and they'll give constructive criticism on how to cook French fries better, or how to do different tasks. And in that case, the Bongo, we're doing the assessments to help those managers give constructive criticism in a more friendly, more impactful way. And we're evaluating them both with, again, video evidence, the option for human evaluation, but really the AI is scaling observational assessment.
So what I want to drill into, though, or at least highlight in that, is I do think what you just called out there about also the hard tactical skills is one that I think can easily be overlooked with some of this video stuff. Where, again, it can be easy to think, oh yeah, we can assess people on video in terms of like an interpersonal interaction where they're talking with someone or they're delivering something. But that frontline capability of, hey, we've all got basically a studio in our pocket at any point, and having the ability to say, let's actually demonstrate showing that you know how to do this so that we can give feedback, critique, encouragement, whatever that is, to actually help build the skills versus just, hey, I passed the test, I know the right answers, but does that necessarily mean I actually know how to do it in practice?
Yeah, that is exactly, what Bongo's core thesis of a company or vision is, helping people be skill ready, helping them validate that they can take the knowledge that they just learned and apply it in a real world context. And frontline workers, that really is like one of our core ICPs, like ideal customer profiles, of having a learner who, it might not necessarily be interpersonal skills, but if they're, interacting with other workers or other coworkers, employees, or interacting with customers, there's a lot of elements that Bongo can really help give them a safe place to practice, help, again, evaluate and validate that they have those skills, and like I mentioned a second ago, effectively make the materials, the knowledge that's being delivered, make it more meaningful by an evaluation that's, puts it in a real world context as opposed to like,
and we'll talk about how AI is just, to me, the next generation of this, because as we got, I've been along your journey from very early on, because that's the thing. You've been doing this while the company has shifted a little bit in terms of like your business model and your infrastructure. Really going back to the very early days, this was always, if I'm not mistaken, this was always what you were doing with Bongo, was this video kind of feedback loop cycle, correct?
That's right. Yeah. So the original vision has always been like scaling observational assessment, right? So, it was actually founded by a professor who, originally had students, just like when, we were in high school or university, some classes you'd go to the front of the class. And
you had to do it.
Yeah.
Actually do it. And it wasn't just like, oh, can you pass the exam? It was, no, you're going to get up in front of the class and you're going to do whatever it is. Right. And sometimes it was a presentation. Sometimes it was I just remember chemistry, you had to do a certain experiment, and your professor would watch you do it. And then you'd get feedback on, hey, did you actually do that right? Or did you blow up the lab?
That's exactly right. Yeah. So there's, exactly that use case, or it could be like in shop class, building something. Like there's lots of different domains, in education where the observational assessment is really important, but it basically, and far more in corporate L&D, right? Like apprenticeships or just being onboarded or validating that a partner can actually talk about, a partnership or a product that they're maybe not representing as their own company. there's lots of use cases where traditionally it's been like a one-on-one kind of format. And that's what Bongo, the original vision, and still today, that vision of scaling observational assessment. But yeah, like you were just alluding to, the ability to add, especially this last
Automation.
15 months, pretty robust AI capability really allows us to scale that in a way that nobody's been able to do in the past.
Well, and so with that piece, because I think this is going back to the corporate L&D challenge and the journey you've been on along the way. I think this is one that not just corporate L&D, but I even think professors, and back to my K-12 days, it is always hard to scale observational assessments. It is through analog methods. It's always something. I think back to when I was in the 8th grade class, you couldn't be with every single student all the time. It was always a challenge to see, do they actually have the ability to demonstrate the skills? And historically, as an industry, we've always struggled with, so how do we actually measure whether people can do it or not? It does put us in this precarious position where when people go, is what you're doing working?
That's
a lot
right.
of times it's,
so
we think so. I mean, we sure hope so. They're passing the test. They went through the stuff, but we don't really have any empirical evidence that they have improved or are actually able to do it. And I think that observation piece is that validation, even pre-generative AI.
Yeah, no, you couldn't agree more. And that's like, almost like me on my soapbox with, our industry is learning and development. There's lots of tools that focus on learning, right? Of pushing content, pushing learning to learners. There's, I would argue there's not a ton that are truly focused on like development. Can they actually apply what they just learned? And that's really where Bongo, hits home. And I think where we're quite unique is that we're, laser focused on, can that person take what they just learned and, apply
do something with it?
Yeah, do something. Does it have a, and that's, I think again, with the AI being able to scale things, whether it's observational assessment or just that validation that they have truly learned it and can apply it. That's where, we're able to have L&D practitioners really, be able to be empowered and transformed into like doing all the tasks, if you will. Like that is like the old way of just being task oriented. The new way is, if you will, is through Bongo being able to have a validation step that like, yep, learning actually happened and can be applied.
Learning occurred.
Learning occurred. Practitioners then can focus on, well, how can we take this and actually apply it to, business outcomes, right? Not just like checking the box of, yep, everybody watched these videos that I, bought.
Well, and going back to it, I think this is one of the things where, and for those who are watching who may be thinking, well, what is the role of the people? We will get to that. I promise I will save time to talk about that, because I get it can be threatening to go, wait a minute, I hear observation. Now I hear AI is being able to do this. That can incite some discomfort. And I get it. We'll talk about that. But I think, the point that you're talking about there is there are plenty of times where even in a business context, we don't know what skills actually are going to drive performance. And so it's almost a double whammy when you're trying to build skills and you aren't even sure whether the skills are built, because then you can't even validate, well, are those the right skills to drive the performance we're trying to drive? And by doing this well, you might be able to validate, look, we built these skills and we're still not seeing the problem change. So now we need to go back to the drawing board and either adjust the skills or maybe redefine, is there something else breaking down? This really does allow us to be more strategic problem solvers versus just, well, we did everything we think, but it's in a vacuum.
That's right. Yeah, that's totally right. And, I think another element of that Bongo, really has been working hard to help, tackle is being the measuring stick for skills, right? So, there's lots of tools out there, and skills is for sure a hot topic, but there's lots of tools out there that are, working towards self-proclaimed skills. I'm excellent at Excel, and my two buddies that are, I share a cube with also tell me that I'm excellent at Excel.
Yeah.
That to me,
and I have a check mark on my LinkedIn profile that says
exactly
10 people have validated that I'm great at this skill.
That's right. And to me, that's just like rough, because that's just a total guesstimate of whether that, for the organization at least, whether that person truly possesses that skill or that domain knowledge. And that's really where Bongo, what we're working towards on the macro level is, validating that people have skills, having it within a specific context, right? So
that was what I was just going to say. The other side of that is you may have a skill, but can you apply it in the specific context your organization needs? Because going back to this Excel thing, I'm good at Excel, but are you good at Excel for this purpose? Oh, well, no, I'm not.
Exactly.
That's a problem.
That's exactly right. And there's different versions. Good at Excel, does that mean pivot tables, or does it mean balancing a spreadsheet or building spreadsheets or building a model? Like, there's lots of different, I think, nuance. And again, with Bongo, you can be more of a measuring stick, specifically, for especially like power skills. So again, understanding, business process, understanding, or demonstrating interpersonal communication, or how to communicate or articulate your knowledge. And there's a bunch of learning science too that backs, being able to actually articulate a set of knowledge is a much better representation of mastery compared to like a multiple choice exam.
And what's funny about that on the generative AI topic, I have a lot of folks in the higher ed space, to your point about this is a superior way to demonstrate skill. One of the big conversations is, technically students can now use generative AI to do a lot of their writing. Mm-hmm. And there was a bit of a panic around, oh no, how are we going to know whether they're good at this? And it's actually forcing the conversation to change of, well, was them writing actually demonstrating knowledge and skill? In many ways, there was a lot more diversity and superior ways to actually having that person show. And I just know this from, neurodiversity type stuff where it's like some people can't write. Mm-hmm. So it was a terrible assessment of, well, do they actually understand? You could go ask them to do it and they could do it like no problem. But if you ask them, okay, can you put this in 10 bullet points in a paragraph? They'd go, I can't put those pieces together. So I think this goes back to this action learning of, it is a demonstratable way to show that people are actually talented and gifted in what they do, which opens all sorts of opportunity within an organization.
That's right, for sure. Yeah. And I think helping folks, if it's around assessment, Bongo can really help folks like get certifications or credentialed. But another huge element of, again, kind of our thesis as a company is providing a place to practice those skills. So there's, workflows for pure assessment where it's like they're on the hot seat, they have to respond, and then the AI will evaluate them. There's other workflows that are centered around helping and facilitating practice. And that's actually a really cool kind of factoid that people end up in our tool when they get feedback that's AI generated. They end up practicing that skill 3.5 times more compared to just pure human evaluation. And if you kind of double click into like, why is that the case? It turns out people, if it's AI giving them feedback,
psychologically safe.
Yeah, exactly. It's psychologically safe.
Psychologically safe.
Hardship of like, shoot, my boss is going to think I look silly, or my coworkers are going to judge me. They don't associate AI as judgmental, which is a pretty awesome thing. And
which in many ways is funny, because while it can carry bias still, it is objective in what it's saying. So it's not going, well, I just really don't like Josh's cow costume today. I think he's a little too unprofessional, so I'm going to be a little harder on him type. It's just looking at, what did you do? And here's my objective assessment of what you did.
That's right. And yeah, and that's really our approach. Of course, like almost every vendor in L&D is getting into the AI space, or if you want to compete, you need to be an AI company now. It seems like, where I think a lot of organizations in L&D have really focused to democratizing content generation, right? So there's kind of the first level is just like adding a chatbot. Second level is like, hey, input a PDF file or some course material, and the tool will auto create courses. And I think that's
which has been happening, by the way, for a lot longer than since 2022. Sure. So like it's big on the market now, but pre-2022, that was easily done. But I think now it's on the main stage.
That's right. Yeah, it's just access to it's become democratized, and everybody is adding something similar. We've taken an approach around assessments where again, our tools capturing video evidence of a person having knowledge or having a skill. So how we're leveraging the AI, especially this year, it's like a two-part process, if you will. One part is just the delivery. So we call that AI coach. It's evaluating, was that person confident or nervous? Were they informative or persuasive? Okay. A bunch of different tonal aspects. And then it'll give them kind of a readout of like how to improve their delivery or how they're articulating their knowledge. So we came out with that in June. And that was just the first like stepping stone, if you will, to a more recent release we're calling smart scoring. And what smart scoring is contextualized feedback. So it effectively allows an evaluator or an administrator, somebody authoring a course, to input source material. So that could be, again, a PDF. It could be a video of somebody doing something. Bongo will then take that, consume it, generate learning objectives, right? So it'll identify what are the key elements that are trying to become.
What are the key things we should be looking to measure?
Yeah, exactly. What are the key things we're trying to look for? It validates that with the human, right? So the person authoring the assignment, we're not trying to, pull the rug out underneath L&D professionals. We're trying to.
Well, and you wouldn't want to, by the way. You would not want to.
Yeah. We're trying to empower them and make their lives easier and make their role more important effectively at an organization. But so it'll validate that with a human of like, are these the correct learning objectives? And you can really quickly and easily select or deselect them. And then, have 10 learners, 1,000, 10,000 learners make submissions, however many, make submissions, demonstrating that skill, completing that assignment. And then the tool will use those learning objectives to give contextualized feedback. So to that learner, it'll say like, hey, learner, you hit on 3 of the 4 core concepts here. This is the concept you missed on and why next time it's important that you include it. So again, for that practice workflow, it'll help them really hone on that, knowledge. But then it'll also go a step further and evaluate them just like a human would. So similar to having a human, a coach go in there and
where you have a rubric.
Yeah,
some sort of rubric where you're saying, hey, these are all the different things.
Exactly. So a rubric or a framework, and it'll look at on a scale of 1 to 5, how do they do with this learning objective on this, so it'll go down the list and it'll actually grade or evaluate them. And the thing that's like, basically blew our expectations out of the water is in almost all cases, the tool will come in less than 5% variance of a human evaluator. So what that means is people will, comparing it to how a human would score a person,
it's pretty darn close.
It's incredibly close. Yeah.
I mean, you're within your single digit differences there. That's indistinguishable. In my opinion, that's indistinguishable to any human being.
That's right. Yeah. And in a lot of cases, it will come in within 2% variance. So which is truly indistinguishable. You have more variance amongst different human evaluators than you do the AI evaluation. So.
Well, we could talk about the human variance because that affects, everything affects people and how they're assessing it. What you ate for breakfast and the tone in which you left your spouse in the morning as you went to work may change the way you assess people that day, because maybe you're just a little more snarky and you're like, oh, whatever type of a thing. So I want to break down the 2 pieces because to me, this helps people understand how the AI is maturing. Mm-hmm. And to me, this is one of the things that yes, I love that you're doing it at Bongo, but this is the kind of thing that we should be thinking about as learning leaders on how are we thinking about using AI to help people develop skills. And I think you're doing a great job of doing that. So the Gen 1 was really more the, I don't want to say generic, but more of just the like, hey, this is universal feedback. Maybe that's a better word.
Yeah,
So
it's
Gen 1
universal.
earlier this year was like the universal things that are consistent with everybody, their pace, different emotional triggers, things that you're looking for where you can say, like, here's some general feedback on how you perform this, which, if I'm understanding you right, primarily that, going back to our earlier part of the conversation, would be specifically on interpersonal stuff. Is that accurate?
That's accurate. And it's like, how fluidly did they deliver that material? So it'll do things like count how many filler words were used, and look at all the tonal inflection and again, variables like confident versus nervous. But it's centered around, it is more universal, and it's centered around, it's going to be language specific, right? So Spanish is slightly different than English in terms of, how confidence is represented, but in general, it's universally.
But in general, we have enough training data out there. And I think this is kind of where I'm going to with this, is I'm watching and talking to a lot of the AI experts right now to see how this tech is maturing, is the fact that we have a lot of training data out there to give a pretty good assessment on that in general. So I can see where Gen 1 was, let's actually integrate this into here so that basically anybody submitting anything can get some pretty general feedback, but still very helpful in terms of here's how you present yourself to other people.
That's right.
As feedback. So that was Gen 1, correct?
That's right. Yep. And that's especially for use cases on, like you said, interpersonal communication, or like, leadership
presentation skills, delivering a sales pitch, things like that, where it's like, hey, there's a ton of use cases around that.
Yes, exactly. That the AI within that category can be extremely helpful for specific things. And then like you were, I guess,
Gen 2 is Gen 2, which you said just released a couple of weeks ago, correct?
That's right. Yep. Just a couple weeks ago.
Gen 2 is now where I think you use the word contextualization. I would probably use the word personalization. But again, it's one of these, like, now it's going beyond, hey, this is universal feedback for pretty much anything. You're using the same training data set to kind of give that feedback back. Now you're at a state where you're saying you actually have the opportunity to ingest and have it help you understand, which I think is an important part, what should you be looking for based on what you shared with us, to say, here's this material. What kinds of things should we be expecting people to demonstrate? So it's augmenting that process to help you do that. And then it's actually deconstructing that in partnership with the person to say, how are we going to measure that? And then it's actually measuring that as well.
That's right. Yep. That's exactly right. And it's empowering basically instructional designers or L&D practitioners to be more powerful, right? To hold their learners more accountable, to have actual tangible, video evidence of people demonstrating skills or competencies, and being able to bring that information back to larger business units to make actual practical decisions. The just identifying learning objectives is a huge help, right? So like, just imagine a use case of, an L&D professional marketing, builds a bunch of collateral, or the product team, creates release notes, and then the business leans on the L&D department to say, hey, make sure every customer facing employee
is good.
It's good. It's good, right? Can talk about this new marketing asset, or understands the product release notes.
And often they're looking to us to go, you tell us if they're good. And it's like, I don't understand some of this stuff, where now generative AI is serving as that assistant to help you process that information and go, based on all this information, here's what we're thinking the right things are, which, going back to some of the human in the loop piece, my perception and my recommendation on this would be, as part of that, then that is where you as a learning practitioner are working with the business to also validate that. Like, it's assisting you get to that point so that then you can go back and go, is this what good looks like? Like, if we could consistently get people doing this, would you say that is what good looks like? Is that accurate?
Yeah, that's 100% accurate. Okay. And, it can even be flipped too, of the business says, hey, this is good. Find more of this or train on this. L&D folks can take, the perfect sales video or the perfect, person demonstrating that business process. And that can be the source material that benchmarks the AI and evaluates the rest of the organization off of that benchmark. So it's, but I think one of the key things to communicate is this isn't a silver bullet that's going to solve every problem.
We're going to get to that. Don't worry, Josh.
Okay. I'm just making sure that we're not replacing.
And I think we're empowering. Yes, we're going to get to that, because I think unpacking the complexity, and I think it's important we don't oversimplify this, because that's the kind of stuff that can lead to organizations going, great, we don't need to, we can just hit the easy button and this is done. And it's like, no, it's not done. Which, by the way, Sanjay is commenting in there. Sanjay, good to see and hear you. It's been a long time. We need to catch up. But I think his point on this, to clarify, so for Gen 1, so I'm understanding this, there was that universal AI, and this is where we're talking about how the human in the loop is changing. And I think this trajectory is something everyone in the industry should be thinking about. So the trajectory in Gen 1 was AI could provide that universal feedback. What the human then did was they could go in and further give specific feedback around those things. So there still was a human component, where Gen 2 is saying, hey, we recognize that's great, but even from a scalability standpoint, that's still not super scalable. Because when you think of the number of people in an organization, to be able to give personalized, specific, nuanced feedback, you're still only going to touch a fraction of the population. So what Gen 2 is doing is saying, let's let AI assist with some of that more personalized feedback, so we can give that higher degree of feedback to a greater number of people by creating these specific objectives, letting AI analyze and give that feedback. But it's still not kicking people out of the loop, because there's still that additional layer of, well, there's nuance, there's additional complexity, there's other things that you may want to lean in more on. And there's all this interpersonal interaction you should be having with your business, saying, are these the right things? Are these the things we should be focusing? Are these the right measures? Is this what good looks like, type of a thing? So it's just different work and more scalable.
Yeah. And hopefully a lot more impactful too. But how we've seen our product being used too, at especially larger scale, is organizations will look at the AI score. Maybe it's 10 people, maybe it's 100. Again, it could be 10,000 folks that give video submissions. And then they'll say, okay, anybody who scored under a 70, we'll go in and provide human coaching.
Sure.
So a little more high touch. But so it kind of triages the need for the much more expensive resource, like coaches or humans that are going to be providing feedback. And it allows for a very high touch interaction with learners.
Well, or the vice versa. I'm just thinking, you may say, hey, here's our lower scores that we need to lean in more. Or you may go, here's our person who's crushing it.
For sure.
And they're a key talent. We want to make sure this person doesn't go anywhere. Or we start including them as a subject matter expert to say, hey, we need to scale you.
Totally.
You're crushing it. We want to do more with whatever it is you're doing to help other people get to that point. But that's capacity that most organizations, you just don't even have. Most organizations can't even get back to the observation piece, let alone being able to strategically work with all of the data that comes from that.
That's exactly right. Yep. Yeah. And scaling, we like another, I guess maybe it's a cool story to, tell for 30 seconds. When we first started out, adding this AI component, we have, it's a like Fortune 30 company, tech company. And, Bongo's been being used for 2.5 years to do certifications or help facilitate certifications, where they have technical solutions architects go in and, learn a bunch of things through a curriculum. They take a written test, so like handwritten and multiple choice. And then they also have to do a Bongo video assignment. And the last few years, they had an army of evaluators, like 60 or
Oh, I
70
can
people
only imagine.
watching thousands of these 30-minute videos,
Thousands of hours of
these are where they're like dedicated employees to just watching and critiquing videos off of a rubric. So we had been working with them and basically set out with the question of like, can we radically reduce the need for human evaluation with keeping the same level of rigor for this assessment. And yeah, that's so we've been again working with them hand in hand, and them as well as like 24 other existing customers with similar kind of applications or use cases. And I had mentioned earlier, it's the human, comparing the AI score to the human score. Almost always it's less than 5%. In a lot of cases, it's less than 2% variance. In that case in particular, we have it at 0.6% variance across a very large user population. So it is truly indistinguishable for that specific use case, where it's a predefined set of criteria. So like that's awesome in its own right.
Yeah.
But I guess the point I'm getting at is those 70 people that all they do is watch monotonous, the same video
countless
all day
which
long.
nobody, I just know the people who have been in these roles because I've been in them before.
Yeah.
Nobody's like, this is the part of my job I love, is watching the 400th version of XYZ employee give the same speech. And I'm going 3, 2, like, that is not the best use of human capability.
It's just totally not. Right. It's rough, right? Or it's
rough. And that's where sometimes we defend this, like, oh no, if AI takes this, what will we do? And it's like, are you really defending?
Yeah.
Sitting, watching.
Those folks are going to evolve into more meaningful, more impactful.
And you complain because you don't have time to actually work with the people and do the stuff. It's like, this is actually giving you that capacity.
That's right. And the other cool, like, kind of larger business outcome is in that case in particular, instead of having to charge, $4,000 to $6,000 for that certification, we just took out the largest cost of goods sold,
the largest cost
for that. Right. So they can, instead of selling it for, let's say, $5,000, they can sell it for $1,000 and offer way more certifications, right? And that's the ultimate desired outcome, is certifying their,
and democratizes access.
Exactly. So it's, that's just a totally democratizes access with having the same level of rigor, right? Like it's awesome. It shouldn't be, I guess, overlooked.
Well, because that's the thing. A lot of times everybody has the goal of democratizing it, but you end up getting the lunchbox version of the steak dinner. It's like, well, you get the cheaper version, but it sucks.
Yeah.
And you're like, oh, okay, well, that's not really all that great. Versus now you can say, we can offer an affordable version, which now makes this more accessible.
Yep.
Again, I just think of the implications on, diversity, equity, all these things where it's like, well, these things used to be limited to a small segment of the population. We can now say not anymore. Actually, we can open that up.
That's exactly right. And that's like one of the things I'm personally most excited about is adding, we talked kind of a bunch about just skill validation, but adding that same level of rigor, like the same level of accountability to the learning that is done in an apprenticeship or with a manager looking over your shoulder, that holds learners accountable big time. And that's ultimately what, a huge desired outcome of most L&D departments. We can do that at, again, like unlimited scale. And, because it scales a lot better, it can hold L&D community more accountable to learning, but do so at, basically less cost than the business is typically absorbing. So,
well, it's so that hopefully by now, anybody who watches or listens to this, if you're concerned about the implications of your job or whether there's still room for you, hopefully we put that to bed. Because quite frankly, to me, this is the opportunity, the capability, the possibilities are endless here. And it's actually doing the kind of work we actually love doing more and getting rid of more of that work that we go, I actually hated doing that. And I spent 90% of my time doing that. But I think the other part of that is accountability. We often talk, I hear a lot, oh, we want a seat at the table, we want all these things, but a lot of times we don't have the accountability to be able to actually own that seat.
Mm-hmm.
And accountability can be a double-edged sword of, it's going to show that you're doing great when you're doing great, and it's also going to show you're not doing so great when you're not doing so great. And so I think there can be a little bit of, I have to imagine there can be some discomfort that you run into or some resistance. And I just fully anticipate people in my field, yeah, you may be a little nervous about it, because sometimes when you look in the mirror, you might not always like what you see.
Sure. Yeah, I would say, the accountability that we're adding is to the learners, and it allows L&D folks to be able to have there be actual evidence of, the learners are either, button mashing through the content, and it's, then it is a waste of time anyways, or they're actually learning the material. So if, as an organization, if we're going to spend money on buying content or spend company resources on having people, our employees spend time on learning something, Bongo can, basically bridge the gap of it was worth it, right? Like the organization's
they can answer the ROI question of, so we did this. Did we get anything for it? Yes, we did. And we have quantifiable results to show that they did.
Exactly. People didn't just, read and regurgitate. They actually, can apply, like learning truly took place, and they can apply their new skills in context. And, Bongo's AI can validate that automatically. And, again, give L&D practitioners, like, not just a seat at the table, but like, powerful information that allows them to, have proper, strong arguments, and again, empowers them to, have a bigger impact.
No, I mean, I can just say from personal experience, having spent a lot of time around simulation and observation and things like this, where you're actually measuring. And when I hear the thing of like, well, you can't measure soft skills, I'm like, then you don't really understand soft skills, because they absolutely can be measured. You can deconstruct them into behaviors and quantifiably measure them. And I can just say from personal experience, when you have that data, it is a different position that you hold in those conversations.
Yeah.
Because you can actually say, here's what we're working with, and here's quantifiably what we need to do if we're going to get from point A to point B. And it's transformative for our industry.
Yeah, for sure. And I do agree. Transformative is for sure the right word, especially for specific use cases like around certification or credentialing, where you're wanting to validate that person really knows that thing. You mentioned simulations, like that's an awesome application, but oftentimes is really costly to develop that kind of content.
Can be.
Whereas Bongo is a lot more dynamic. You can, copy and paste materials, and it can hold people accountable to those materials in, less than 5 minutes.
What you're doing is, though, even just based on what you said, I mean, it is a simulation in many regards. It's what you're doing. You're saying, here, it's simulate what you would normally do.
That's
you're just capturing it via video. And to me, this is where I celebrated 4 years of this show earlier this month. And one of the things that I pushed on here was, to me, what the democratization and just rapid expansion of generative AI in our industry should be doing. I'm not saying that's what's happening now, because I think, to your point, we're often distracted with a lot of things that are not transformative. But what is transformative is action learning, and actually being able to say, we should be moving more towards learning in action and actually measuring and demonstrating that, and less passive consumption, things like that. That should be the trajectory of every organization in how they're developing their people, because the excuses of, we can't do that, it's too expensive, we don't have the resources, they're vaporizing. And it's no longer a credible excuse.
Yeah, no, I agree that even independent of Bongo, that's one of the major realities of our industry, that AI is, like it or not, it's coming, yeah, it's just giving it more access, and being transformational is inevitable.
Yeah. Well, and I think it's important for practitioners to think about this, because the risk is you can wait until this happens to you, or you
Hmm.
can be in the driver's seat to say, we're going to take a leading role in making this happen in our organizations. Because maybe not this month, maybe not 6 months from now, but at some point, your business is going to have this expectation that we are doing this because we know it can happen. And you don't want to be in the position where you're reacting to that and you're unprepared. And I think we have a unique opportunity right now to get in front of it and say,
Hmm.
why not be on the front end of this rather than responding after it gets handed down to you as an expectation?
Yeah, no, that I think that's really well said. And yeah, and I agree that it doesn't have to be scary. It can be,
No.
companies like Bongo, I think I would hope that all companies are like this. It's not about completely making a subset of people irrelevant. It should be about empowering them to be more impactful, and to do their jobs in an easier capacity and have the output. I think whether it's, I guess it depends on your perspective if it's negative or positive, but like in my view, as AI becomes more and more relevant and, like I said, inevitable, the expectation of output, I think, will increase. Just like we were talking about Excel a little bit ago. Back in the 90s when Excel became a thing, it was transformational for a lot of people that
Yeah.
were in finance or accounting or
And there were
bookkeeping.
people who held tightly to their ledger books,
Exactly.
who
That's
said,
exactly
I'm going
right.
to do long form math. I
Yep.
can't trust this thing.
Yeah.
And it was to their peril.
Yeah,
In all
that's
honesty.
exactly right. And there's still a lot of finance and accounting and bookkeeping folks, like business can't operate without those team members today. So it was transformational, but it transformed the amount of their productivity and their output. Like
Yes.
I can't even
And the
imagine
quality of it.
and the
It's not
quality,
even
exactly, the
it's not even
accountability.
just do more. It's like sometimes it's like we can deliver a better product,
That's right.
and the expectation of quality is going up as well as quantity.
Yep, that's exactly right. So that's really my perspective of how tools like ours, are transforming the L&D industry. Is we want to be making organizations and ultimately, people authoring learning, more capable, more powerful, more scalable, and ultimately more important out of business, compared to like the old way of doing things.
Yeah.
Status quo. Like there's a reason that observational assessment, was really hard to do at larger organizations. It's because it doesn't scale, or historically it hasn't scaled very well. And now that Bongo and tools like ours are coming about, the expectation, I think, is going to be transformed, and ultimately, the expectation of the learners is, I think, what's going to be. I guess I'm like hesitant
Well,
to
and
say
people need
disruptive,
this.
but
That's the thing, because
yeah,
there
people do
is a
need it.
rising expectation on employees. And so there is and should be a rising expectation on us to deliver better
Mm-hmm.
outcomes,
Mm-hmm.
because they need
Exactly.
it. Our companies need it. The reason skills is the number one word used in the boardroom right now
Mm-hmm.
is because companies recognize, hey, we got to do something about the skill stuff. And it's up to us to say we can do better.
That's
And I
right.
think accepting that status quo of, well, this is just how we've always done it, it's unacceptable. And the technology is enabling it. And that's where I'm saying the excuses of, well, there's just no other way around it, they're vaporizing.
That's right. Yeah, totally agree, for sure.
So on this one, as people are making the transition, because I will be keenly aware. I've had plenty of these conversations, and I did one recently where we talked about some of this specifically around presentation skills, which
Mm.
I think, and actually I do have one question for you for Gen 3
Sure.
from where you're going, because I'm actually really curious about this. But for organizations, this is a shift, and I'm curious if you've seen or experienced how to help people navigate this, because in many ways, these conversations can be very foreign to an organization,
Mm-hmm.
because historically it has been, hey, here's a bunch of information. just make sure people get it.
Yeah, for sure.
Instead of, okay, but what do we need them to do as a result of this? And sometimes that can be met even by your own business leaders as, oh, I didn't really think that far ahead, because it's a foreign concept, because we really haven't had the opportunity to say, well, we're actually going to measure whether people can do this or not. So anything that you've observed as companies are starting to lean into this, and as you're seeing the technology advance here for making that smooth transition?
Yeah, I would say maybe two things. One, that's, if organizations or individuals are running into that, I'd encourage them to reach out to us to have us help them build a business case, and to justify, how it can be transformational for an organization. But then the second is, I would argue, and kind of what I see most commonly is the business or organizations or different departments, don't even give L&D professionals that courtesy. They just plop on their desk of like, hey, I need you to do blah, blah. I need you to
here's the 300 page PowerPoint. Get it out to everybody.
Exactly. And that's really, we have a lot of organizations or customers where that's the reality. And that's really a big part of us developing this kind of capability, is to try to make that type of scenario just easier to accommodate, right? When a marketing organization or the business says, hey, marketing, we just spent, several $1 million generating all these leads, and we have all this marketing collateral. Why can't, we need the L&D department to make sure the salespeople are trained, or make sure the call center people are trained. That's the only context given. Our tool and methodology,
requires asking more thoughtful questions.
Exactly. Right. It helps empower and get L&D done, basically. So hopefully that.
No, I think it's a good point. And again, this ties to the conversation I had last week with Rob Lauber about the fact that being a strategic business partner, it's a different skill set. And we have to adjust and adapt to this, because it is different from just going, okay, here's the stuff, let's figure out how we make that happen. That's a different skill than saying, here's the stuff, hang on a second, we need to talk about what this really is, what we're trying to accomplish. And that requires sometimes some healthy conflict and tension. And it also doesn't happen overnight. I mean, organizations I've worked with, if you aren't in this state and already having these conversations as part of your regular routine, now is a good time to start changing that way. And if you're used to just getting the thing and then executing, actually saying, well, let me just start asking these questions. Even if our process hasn't changed yet, let's start having those strategic business discussions.
And I think, or I guess I would hope that's one of the core things that the smart scoring and the learning objective generation process, it helps with that, right? Where it's, you can take any material and it'll auto identify the learning objectives, and that L&D professional can go have a conversation around, hey, marketing folks, is this what's most important in these assets? Then it's actually a conversation that can happen after 5 minutes of getting that material.
Yeah, let the generative AI do the work, and then you have the consultative discussion of, hey, what you shared with me, what we think this is what you're trying to get across is this. Is that correct? Right. No, it's not correct. Well, then we better talk about it, because that can also help inform the business too, because generative AI is smart. If it says, well, this is what I'm gathering from this, and then they go, well, that's not what we meant, maybe we need to have a look at what we're actually running people through, because maybe we're not actually communicating that message very well.
Yep. No, that's exactly, it's exactly my point, right? It allows and facilitates a conversation to be had. And as opposed to the old way, if you will, of, the L&D folks get the marketing assets, and then the L&D folks need to go become an expert on that material. Like, that's an insane amount of work and hard. And, in my opinion, kind of almost inappropriate, right? So Bongo can, help facilitate those conversations without having to become an expert in that domain or in the material that's being evaluated. So hopefully,
well, and I think
I really hope
I love that you're doing that, because it's almost like the little training wheels to help people make that shift to go, because it is hard if you're not used to having those discussions. Sometimes you're like, I don't even know how to have them, and this can equip you with that. And really, quite frankly, I would encourage anybody to be doing. You can be using generative AI to do that today, regardless of where you are, because you can go, hey, like, use ChatGPT, use Bard, use one of these tools to help you distinguish, okay, what am I dealing with? What questions could I ask for clarification? And it should help you have a more informed discussion. But I love that you're building it in the flow, so that just then becomes part of the natural process.
Yeah.
My follow-up question with the time we have left, and this is why I wanted to go early, is Gen 3. Okay, so I'm listening to your conversation of how you started with Gen 1, where you are with Gen 2. I'm tying back to the fact that we talked about, like, let's say you're assessing someone doing something in a restaurant, or you're assessing someone driving, a forklift or things like that. A lot of those things, generative AI, at least the general big AI models, may not have the training data necessary to be able to come to the conclusion of, I can assess how well this person is doing this. Do you anticipate, this is a little, you don't have to tell me if this is part of your product roadmap, but is some of that, as you identify some of these things that may be unique to an organization, you can then get to a point where you're actually training your own model to actually start to detect some of these other things that may not be broad scale, things like that. Because I can see opportunity where you would actually be able to say, well, if we've trained 10,000 forklift drivers in our organization, we've got a pretty good idea of what it should look like. And I'm just curious if you see an opportunity down the road where you could continue growing in that space.
Yeah, so there's a lot of different paths and opportunity in front of us, and I would say this year's been, I've been with Bongo for, I guess this is my 11th year. This has been the coolest, and most exciting. Just the pace of how things are moving is insane, both within Bongo, but also just in general. And it's not just the technology that's moving, like we've been talking about. It's organization's expectation that's also been, pretty rapid. But yeah, in terms of, directionally our roadmap, I'd say,
I know here I'm asking you like 2 weeks after you launched the other pieces, like, cool. Hey, where you go? But that's the pace things are moving. I mean, I think at the end of September, nobody expected us to have these big, large language models hooked up, these transformers hooked up to things, being able to do this kind of stuff. And I think the potential is only capped by our imagination.
It is, right. And I would say Bongo, we have high expectations for sure on ourselves, and, the continued development of our own functionality and capability. I'd say, kind of Gen 2.5, if you will, is continuing to add, we talked about democratization of AI. We're wanting to make it seamless, frictionless as possible to being able to add video assessment and AI coaching to any form of evaluation, right? So whether that's tapping into, existing content, integrating into existing LMSs. So we're wanting to make it as easy as possible and as frictionless as possible to add this type of accountability to learning. So that's, I would say, some of the very rapid state. Of course, there's not a lot of AI in that, but that's like what we're working on, like this quarter kind of thing, as well as continued refinement. I'd say additionally beyond that, so maybe Gen 2.75 or Gen 3, there's certainly a path to very specific and pointed applications, whether it's, like the driving a forklift or washing your hands as a healthcare professional. There's also predefined frameworks that are very, common, like, the Sophia framework or that we're, considering or have been, I guess, doing investigation on, like, man, would it be, really awesome if you could just like have a little drop down and say, hey, the tool, we want to evaluate people on this context, but within this framework, right? That's already, validated and commonly
pre-existing
accepted.
framework that again
Exactly.
is,
So like there's some of that, I guess, investigation. There's, I would say the majority of AI right now is predominantly evaluating what's being verbalized. So
it's
there's
language. It's very language based.
It's very language based and syntax based and whatnot. But so there's quite a bit of investigation around doing image recognition and what's on the actual video. I think I know we have millions of users using Bongo for that specific application, but if we're able to continue to broaden the medium of what evaluation takes place.
Because at some point you're going to get enough data. And I think sometimes that's what people don't always realize is these things aren't just magic. They need massive amounts of training data to be able to start to validate we're actually getting pretty good at this kind of stuff. And again, my roadmap might be like Gen 5.0 or something like that.
Well, for sure. So the other element is so there are organizations that are forking a LLM and trying to train their own model. We actually are taking in the AI world a philosophically different approach that's called the zero shot approach, where it's like fundamentally not training a model. Now that said, we have lots of data and like you mentioned, we have millions of users that so there is a path to creating our own effectively, but what the nuance or how Bongo is specifically different is all of our evaluation is specific to an assignment, right? So we're not saying, hey, dump in the whole knowledge base and our AI is going to
you wouldn't want to. You wouldn't want to. It would get too overgeneralized.
It's too overgeneralized. A lot of times larger organizations are compartmentalized where they don't want this department to necessarily know what that department, every little
or
thing.
even be graded against that because they're like, well, but the way they do it over there is functionally different than the way we do it. And we don't need their training data messing up our thing, which again, this could be a whole nother hour-long conversation about where trajectionally AI is going, because again, I think that specialization of AI models and how all this is going to come into play. So to say, I think, go for it.
I was just going to say the other huge reality with our methodology is being assignment specific. Our tool can be a lot more pointed and basically pragmatic in the evaluation of if you're trying to evaluate, did that person demonstrate that they can give constructive criticism? You don't need to have a knowledge base or
nor would you want it pulling from 10,000 different things. You're like, I'm looking for you to assess these 3 things, and that's
exactly. So I would argue, or I'm like positive, we have a lot more contextualized data. So it's not just the amount of data that's being gobbled up. All of our data is contextualized to a specific assignment, which, I would argue is way, way more meaningful and ultimately will be more valuable over, whether it's Gen 5 or Gen, 3.5, 3.5. But it is a fundamentally different,
it's a different approach,
attack angle that we're taking as opposed to like a lot of the LMSs that are adding this type of capability, generative AI capability.
Well, this won't be the last time you're back on. I have no doubt about that, because I want to continue hearing where things are going and how you're leveraging this technology to enhance what I think is probably one of the most critical aspects of our industry is to make, like I said, to me, the shift to action learning should be on everyone's priority list. So I'm so thankful that you were able to make time. I enjoyed it. The cow costume just made it even that for fun. So thank you, Josh, for joining me. And for everybody who's watching, listening, hopefully this has changed your thinking, opened you up to some new opportunities for how you can be thinking about driving skills in your organization. So thank you, Josh, for being here.
Awesome. Yeah. Thank you for having me.
All right. We'll see you all later, and I will be back next week.